now like to invite Thea up to do our second last presentation of the day. And Thea's presentation is measuring the impact of drought policy tools on self-reliance. Seems to be having issues. Let's stay.
Perfect. I can't see any of you. Good afternoon, everyone, because old age means I need 2 pairs of spectacles. So I'm very happy to take questions afterwards because I wouldn't be able to see if you raise your hand. But at the start, I'd also like to take the opportunity to say thank you very much to Brett and the team for today. It feels a little unreal to be standing here today to talk to you about drought, because everything in Queensland has been about floods. A couple 100 kilometers across the border, we have floods. Yet, all of this is related. Whether we're talking floods or drought, it is all about climate change. Climate change affects you and me. It will most certainly affect us in the weeks to come. 7 News had a wonderful insert yesterday showing some of the farmlands in New South Wales and showing how every single bit of a fruit and veg that you can think of is underwater. There is no doubt that it affects us, all of us, climate change, and it most certainly affects farmers. So perhaps we can use continuous drought and think about that in the context of continuous floods as well. So I think it's also important to understand that agriculture is the one untouchable political aspect. And I thought I wanted to mention it, John, at the start, because it doesn't matter which government comes into power, no one touches the farmers. This means that the reality in Australia is that we have a very large number of policy tools and programs, and it's all aimed at improving the financial position of farmers. And none of us complain because Australia's history is absolutely linked to farming. We know that quote that Australia's history was built on the sheep's back, and that resonates with all of us. It makes perfect sense for us to support this wide range of programs and policy tools aimed at helping the financial position of farmers. Yes, climate is one of the main drivers behind this very large plethora of programs that we have, but then also the second main reason is the fact that we have deregulation. I think deregulation is important at this stage because farmers, particularly beef farmers, are very happy to be market price takers at the moment. We've had 18 months where the beef prices, it's absolutely skyrocketed. And from a really good discussion I had with the mayor of Boulia a week or so ago, he says it's still going to run for a while. So that's the good part. It's deregulated, and particularly beef farmers can take advantage of that. So to me, climate change is an important aspect of my work. And I would argue that one of the most difficult climate risks to address at a policy level and at a farm gate level would be drought, because it is long and recurring in Australia. And it's very important within the work that I do in Central Western Queensland. So there, my work is really about sheep and beef cattle farmers as well as wool. And the fact that I have to immerse myself within these drought-stricken areas, it's just completely clouded the way that I think of climate change, and it most certainly is the reason why that is the topic of my paper today. In the industry project that I have in Central Western Queensland, I am very blessed, Melissa, and this is for you. I have access to the income tax return of farmers and of their businesses if it's in a different structure. I have access to their business financial statements, their personal financial records, their loan applications, their farm household applications, and even the extent to which they have gone to the Country Women's Association, who have supported them and will continue to support farmers when they are in financial distress and the ute breaks down. That's the role that the Country Women's Association plays. And it's in amongst looking at all of the data in this study that the key question I come back to is, which of all of these several policies and programs really work best at solving the problem of drought? So within these farms that I'm connected to, I can tell you that all of the farmers use a multitude of programs and policy tools. So it's important at the very least to rank them so that we can identify what are the issues, what are the types of programs that will help us going forward. When we start thinking about which of these programs and policy tools are the best, I think we need to answer two questions. The first one is, who is responsible for drought? And the second one is, what are the objectives of our drought policy tools? So I have to take you to 1989. So this is the two small words which I can't see and you can't see, that tells us about who is supposed to manage drought. And the key date was 1989, when drought relief was taken out of our natural disaster relief arrangement scheme, because there's a mismatch between going in and giving disaster relief as compared to the long recurring cycles of drought that we have. This meant that in 1990, we had an enormous change in the way that we viewed drought, when it became accepted that it is a regular feature of our Australian landscape, and therefore it is a farm production risk. On the back of that, government appointed the Drought Policy Review Task Force, and their job was to come up with policy answers that would help farmers in managing drought as a farm production risk. The work of the Review Task Force caused a seismic change that still reverberates within tax policy and in drought policy in Australia. Because what the Review Task Force did was to recognize self-reliance as the key to it all. And what they did was to conceptualize the responsibility of government and farmers within self-reliance. And the small words behind me, I'm standing right in front of it. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to read to you the first bit of what the task force says about the responsibilities of farmers. They said self-reliance recognizes the primary responsibility of individual producers for the commercial performance of their enterprises and for ensuring that agriculture activity is carried out in an economically and environmentally responsible manner. And then, what is the role of government? To sweep in when we have exceptional circumstances. The work that the task force did then resulted into we're seeing our first national drought policy. And in the middle, you can see that this drought policy had three main objectives that we still see absolutely in our drought policy in Australia today. So the first objective of our national drought policy was to encourage primary producers and other sections of the rural Australia to adopt self-reliance approaches to managing climate variability and change. The second objective was to maintain and protect Australia's agriculture and environmental resource base during periods of extreme climate stress. And then the third one is to ensure early recovery of agriculture and rural industries. Three objectives that I've interpreted with self-reliance in mind. So if you'll indulge me on the far side, you'll see my interpretation of the three objectives, and I've reworded this in self-reliance speak. So the first objective for me is all about aspirational goals. We know that we have to continually work to prepare ourselves for drought. It's our aspirational goal simply because droughts will not cease. The second objective of the MDP, if I rephrase it with self-reliance hat on, it is all about business-mindedness to me and risk management. This means you need a drought management plan, and really it comes down to cash. The only way that you can manage all of this in a business context is to have cash. The third one to me is all about the future focus. The only way that we can really live and farm sustainably is if we think about sustainability in the context of self-reliance. So whether you agree with my interpretation, 1, 2, or 3, all of them, it really doesn't matter in the bigger picture, because drought policy in Australia is about knowing whether we are getting farmers to be more self-reliant. And this is what I'm faced with if I think about the data that I have within these farmers. And from that, I can tell you now that there isn't one particular measurement method that you can use to determine which of these tons of policies and program tools really work best. And this is where I want to ask you to think about what you know about farming and tax, and perhaps to, in the back of your mind, think about the one policy tool in tax world that you reckon will help farmers. And hold that. Income? We'll see. We'll see if it works. So can I share with Ken? Of course, income averaging is going to be there, but there's much more to it. So what you see behind me are the programs and policy tools that you would expect, which income averaging is one, but also the ones that I see most common in Central Western Queensland. And you can see that the categories of programs and policy tools that we have, it ranges from input cost subsidies to debt assistance, social grants, the usual income tax stuff, and then the free financial advice that the farmers can get access to. So now I want you, with this in mind, to pick one. So I would imagine, can you still income averaging? Righto. So that's one aspect. But then think about what data do you need to work out if those policy tools and programs actually work, and how difficult it would be if you are the Minister of Agriculture to make a call on this. I can tell you, countless ministers have made that call. So if we look at the first one, income input cost subsidies, the ones that I see most often are the diesel rebates and fuel credits. It's not just the usual ones that we see in a drought context, but also the other transport subsidies that the Queensland government has absolutely been fantastic about since forever. So to give you an idea, 87% of all the farmers within the Central Western Queensland area that are part of our study, 87% of them really rely on these subsidies. Thousands of dollars that reduce their costs. What do you need? Well, your diesel rebates come from income tax returns. Your fuel tax credits sometimes appear within annual financial statements. And then we do not have a split between the usual fuel tax credits and the special ones that we get from the Queensland government. Second one is debt assistance. Farmers across Australia get access to a whole range of concessional loans. The ones that I'm obviously most interested in are the drought concessional loans. What do I see within these farms? 50% of the participants in our study actually use the concessional loans. You need a really bad financial situation, but a good drought management plan to get access to these concessional loans. If you do get a concessional loan, the first 5 years is interest only, and then you start paying capital and interest. So look at the mismatch. You need a drought management plan. And what will the drought concessional loan give you? It'll give you breathing space so you don't have to repay the principal. But how do we know that the money that you've saved is actually being used to meet your own plan that you've submitted with your concessional loan application? Having those concessional loans and knowing that there's a drought management plan at the date when you apply for the loan doesn't solve the question of whether it is a good policy tool. Then the third one, which is the one that we've seen so many different studies and government reports about, is the farm household allowance. The farm household allowance has got nothing to do with your business directly, but you get access to the farm household allowance if your situation is so extreme that you cannot take care of your family. So you can imagine in the most difficult of circumstances in a drought-stricken area like central Western Queensland, you would think that there would be a lot of it. 32% of our participants have access to the farm household allowance. But it's a difficult decision because the thing that it doesn't show us with these social grants like the FHA is the decision. If you are the mum and dad who does not know where your next dollar will come from, the decision that you make is, do I rely on getting access to the FHA or do I take a job in town? So off-farm income and diversification is a protection measure for your family, but also a good way of actually farming in Australia. So that's the dichotomy. And what I see most often is in the study, 86% of our participants have significant non-primary production income. So I've gone and just excluded anything below $2,000, and it still leaves 86 of them, even in the most dire of circumstances, with this income. Free financial advice, next one. Free financial advice from our rural financial counselling services. Of course, I am a proponent. But how on earth do you measure it when you are a rural financial counsellor? Because the fact is, you want to get rid of your client as quickly as possible. Yeah? So how do you know whether they are in a good position? I can tell you what, the people with the best insights into what really happens in farms and how we use each of these methodologies are the rural financial counsellors. But the problem that they are faced with is getting enough data after they leave the client to prove the value of those services. And then we get to income tax concessions. Can I share with you that long-term averaging, only 11% of the farmers in central Western Queensland ever use income averaging because no one has tax profits. Yes. This also means that if you don't have tax profits, it's very hard to have any investments into a farm management deposit because that's one of the requirements. You need tax profit because that's the maximum of what you can put into a farm management deposit. Yet, if we look at overall, what is the one policy tool that government tells us is the flagship measure? It's farm management deposits. And you can see from right at the bottom, one of the best quotes about the FMD is this. It's one of government's flagship measures helping farmers prepare for income downturns, including those caused by drought. I'm yet to see one iota of evidence that that is the case. Because the problem that we face is when we think about something like the farm management deposit scheme and government's characterization as a flagship is, firstly, it implies that government has a surefire, fail-safe way, a normative standard to evaluate the impact of the FMD on farmers. And they don't. What we have is it exists, how much money is sitting in the scheme, and how many accounts. That doesn't tell us if it is actually farmers who are suffering drought who are putting their money into the scheme. And of course, then the second part to that is that FMDs have a particular application in a drought preparedness context. You can't focus on the deposits in the scheme. You've got to look at how farmers use it to know if there's any correlation between how you take the money out of the scheme and what you actually do with it at the farm gate level. So we are in a situation where the usual drought policy tools, the usual things that we can expect, such as income averaging, are the ones that we would usually go to in a farm context. But the reality is profits, accounting profits, and tax profits are very much the same. It's only in recent years, and again, we picked that up from our research in terms of the number of farmers who actually claim instant asset write-offs, where there is a bit of a difference. But for the most part, you have accounting profits and tax profits exactly the same. So the thing that is absolutely not understood is that more than 60% of farmers in Australia do not make a profit. So why are they in business? Because they have cash. They have cash. And as part of this study, what I can share with you is the only way that you can know if any of these policy tools are in fact effective, play a role, have any impact, is when you analyze cash. And that's one of the really good outcomes of our study, is that we've been able to determine the actual cash impacts of many of these tools. The problem with that is you need 3 spreadsheets. The one spreadsheet that I will be sharing with the National Forum of Rural Financial Counsellors in Kent in a couple of weeks, the shortest that we could get that basic Excel spreadsheet to is 426 lines. And that's crazy. So that gives you an indication of how difficult and an intensive task it is to actually measure the impact of drought. So I close off with, I wish I was Ben, because I wish I knew more about economics. I wish I understood more how to put all of this into one model. I have the stories of individual farmers in terms of all of the data, financial statements, loan applications, FHA, all of them together. I have 87 businesses that I look at. Who has that? That's why I really do feel blessed. And I can tell the story of each of those. But my goodness, I wish I could ramp it up. And this is where I'm hoping that you will give me some ideas to do that as well. So I close off and thank you very much for that.